Hey, what's going on, guys? Alex here with English Sports Center. And today we're going to talk about a topic that's really great for pan fishing. And honestly, you can catch a lot of different things with this. And this is going to be a float and fly. And that's going to be, we're going to talk about, different ways to rig them up, techniques and whatnot. So let's start off with what we got here. So what a float and fly is pretty much a small actual fly or feather jigged, etc. Anything that has a little bit of flash or looks like a little fly that goes attached underneath a float. Either a bobber, or there's different styles, different ways to do this, so we will talk about that. So essentially, this is going to work great for a lot of different panfish species like bluegills, crappie, also perch like white and yellow perch. But don't be surprised, because there's times when you're going to have different types of fish in a region hit it, like pickerel and bass. And this is not only like strictly set for freshwater. You can also use this in different creeks in the tidal areas here, somewhere where there's not a lot of current. I will say almost like those shallow creeks that are a little bit slacked off heavy current areas. But you never know, you can always use some in a little bit different areas, so it doesn't mean that you won't use them in heavy current areas, but I prefer to use them in a little bit slack water. Now, what we're doing here is mimicking a lot of the small forage that you have on these ponds or creeks. So as we all know, a lot of these fish feed on small insects, whether that's small flies, ants, whatever is under the water. This is going to work great, and also works great for those stock trout in different areas. Right over here we have actual flies and this is two different types of flies that I like to use, or three different types of flies that I like to use. Small nymph that has a little weighted head. A couple of these dry flies, and I'll explain what we do with those, and some of these woody buggers here. Some of them unweighted, some of them weighted. And the way I like to use those, we'll go over here in a second. But over here, it's one of my favorites also. It's just a firefly jig, either on like a 164 to a 116. I use, them depending on how deep I'm fishing. And some of these hot skirts and tungsten jigs. This is pretty much a nymph, and these are just, pretty much skirted jigs on here. Different material. So a lot of times what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie one of these individually first and kind of work it with different depths with a bobber. The feather jigs, you don't want to attach anything to them, because the actual feathers are what gives it some action. As you twitch the bobber, you're going to work it almost like a popping cork. You'll cast it out there, give it a few twitch, and let it sit for a few seconds and work your cadence. You can be a little more aggressive. You can slow it down. Just let the fish show you what they want. So start fast and work it a little bit slower, or start slow and work it faster. And remember when you get that bite. The feather itself is going to pulsate as it stops, and it's just falling a little bit slower. If I'm fishing super shallow water where it's like 3 foot or less, I like to use this 1/64th, because it will take a little bit of time to fall. So it's kind of suspended a little bit longer than like a 1/16. As we go deeper and we're fishing, let's say 5 or 6 foot of water, we're going to use a little bit heavier jig, because you want it to fall a little bit faster and sinks a little bit deeper. Now, the question is, how far do we want these off the bottom? You don't necessarily want them obviously hitting the bottom. You want it kind of like suspended in the middle. So if you're fishing 3 foot of water, do 1.5 feet. If you're doing 6 foot of water, do like 3 foot and play with that. It also helps to mess around with it, with the depth as you're fishing. Now, the actual flies here, I'll utilize them just like that, either tie one single one. But one thing I've learned from some fly fishermen, it's doing a tandem. When you get into a school of fish and you're, hammering fish out of this one area, I like to tie either the nymph or the actual firefly, and then right above it, what I'll do is I'll tie this first to my main line, And then right at the eye, I'll do another little dropper piece of line and tie my nymph below it. That way I have this little dry fly suspended above it. And you can do it either whether it's, 4 inches or about a foot away from it. You can play around with that. And when I'm hammering fish, I'll usually do that and start catching 2 fish at a time. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, anything big that you can put on there. It's more of what you want on the bottom is the heavier jig. So if you have a weighted jig, put that on the bottom. And if you have unweighted stuff like, the willy booger there, or a smaller nymph that's a little bit lighter than that, you can attach it above it and create like a little tandem under that bobber. These guys here, the hot skirts, are great whenever you're trying to get fish's attention with flash. They don't have a lot of action. These you can actually put a small little piece of plastic underneath it, like right on it, and work it, because that's going to give it a little more bulk if you need it, or a little more color contrast. You can play around with that, and that works great with those hot skirts. Both of these techniques work great for bluegill, crappie, and yellow perch whenever I'm fishing those creeks and trying to find them. I just kind of cast it around and work my cadence and try to find them. Now, the bobber selection here. You don't want anything huge, but if you need distance, you can go a little bit bigger, but not massive. Most of these are weighted bobbers, as you can see here. And the reason why we want them is because it helps you with the distance. We have 2 different styles here. We have a round bobber and some of these kind of like, teardrop. You could also use a cigarette style bobber if you need the distance. If I'm on a kayak or a boat and I'm just kind of casting around up close, I like to use the round ones, because there's times where you're not actually going to pop that little bobber and twitch it back to you. You can actually sit there and just twitch your rod, so this bobber's sitting there going back and forth, just creating a little bit of action, and that jig below, it's going to be doing some slight movements. So remember, play around with that. The colder it gets, the slower I go typically, and the warmer it gets, the faster I go with the cadence. A lot of you guys will also ask what type of line we're going to be utilizing with this. And with this, we're using ultralight gear to light gear. So I'm using anywhere from 6, 4, and 2 pound tests, depending on where I'm going for. If I'm just bluegill fishing and I want to have fun and have a lot of action, I'll go to a little 500 size reel with 2 to 4 pound test. The rod length is depending if I need distance or not. Personally, I prefer something in that 6 foot range, so 6'4", and just mess around with that, and that'll give you a lot of fun. If I'm messing around in some of the creeks, like where I'm catching yellow perch, pickerel, and a mix of things, I actually go a little bit heavier. I'll go anywhere from 4 to 6 pound tests, and I use a little bit heavier rod where I'm utilizing a 6'4" light or 6'6" light action rod, so I have a little more power, since you will be hooking some bigger fish like those pickerel. Now, they can cut through your line, so make sure you have some extra jigs, because you never know. Sometimes they start hitting those small jigs, and if you hook them right on the side of the mouth, you can land them. A lot of times if they swallow it, obviously it's gone, but it's fun to catch them on these ultralight gear. Once again, bobber weights and sizes depends if you need distance. If you're gonna need that distance, go with a little bit heavier bobber. If you're uptight, then go with just that light stuff and the smaller bobber for you guys to utilize that. Colors are gonna be one of those things where I personally like to go with natural colors. So my personal favorite is going to be black, honestly. That matches a lot of that forage and all of these mill ponds and a lot of these creeks. But don't be afraid to throw some of those more natural or more common colors like the chartreuse and white. Have a mix of them, play around with them. That's the whole fun of it. Get out there, try all this stuff out. Different technique. Some of the fly fishing stuff applies to this that you can actually utilize on a regular spinning gear and get out there and have some fun. So make sure to try some of this stuff out. And remember, if you had any more questions, come by to the store, talk to some of us, and we can help you out with this. And we'll see you guys next time.